Hello and welcome to the session where we'll be reviewing the version 3.1 of the Casework Counsellor. And so this is a component of the AutoScholar Advisor system, and the Casework Counsellor is intended for student support services and people who generally provide all kinds of counseling services to students. And we did look at some of this functionality before, where we looked at the counselor bookings method. And so you can create your bookings with students and so on. And that was an abstracted component. And as we pointed out, it could also be used for scheduling assessments or for monitoring the attendance at events and so on. So today we want to look at another abstracted component, the annotation microservice. And we'll see that that's useful in maintaining student case files and for creating session notes, and we'll look at what that means now. So to search for a student, of course, here in the Casework Counsellor, you can enter the student number or some fragment of the student name and so on. So if we click on search, then it's so we've specified a complete student number here, so that's loaded up. And of course, this is a simulated student in the Scholar Cloud fictitious institution. So when we load that up, then it loads the current semester advice for the student. So this is the academic advice generated for students and advising about the class of degree and so on. So this has been shown many times already. And of course, the academic record, so the raw data for that student can also be reviewed here. So that's all available as usual. And what we want to look at is the annotation microservice. So if we click here on student case file, then that's showing us, number one, we can search for students. So you can search for a student through this interface. But if we click on a card here, then it loads up that this is the student under consideration. Then if we click on the recommendation here, we can see some of the types of recommendations that we can apply to a student. So this is if we are reviewing a student's case file. And so number one, if we read that student's case file, we can see there are no current entries for the student. And we may have, for instance, had a counseling session with the student, or perhaps we are reviewing their case in terms of their progression and so on. And we may decide on some progression strategy. So for instance, we might think that the student is performing well enough and we believe they can take a higher credit load, and that may help them get on track to a minimum time to graduation. So if that's what we want to classify for the student, then we can choose that, and then we can write a motivation towards that. So currently it's just showing the same text here, but really the recommendation will be recorded. So we would expect that under motivation, we would write some comments as to why we believe that the student can be allowed to overcredit. And that would largely be based on our review of that student's academic records. I mean, in this case, you probably wouldn't want to recommend that because the results are not great here. Well, that's just looking at one assessment record. So we may really want to look at how the student has performed over time. And we may want to look at some of these summary statistics here. So we would form a picture by reviewing that student's records. And then based on our counseling or perhaps review sessions with that student, we are ready to make that recommendation. So perhaps we wouldn't make that recommendation in this case. We could also recommend to reduce the credit load to increase the chance of success. So that's another recommendation we could make. So let's create that recommendation for one. So that's created there. We could also, in addition to that, recommend that the student engage with supplemental instruction or whatever other support services are available at the institution. So this list is customizable. So you can create a list of recommendations, and so we can add to the list for the student that they should further engage with the psychologist, for example. So that's in the student case file. We can create recommendations based on various pieces of evidence, and we can write in a motivation here. So this is useful, especially in advising complex cases where follow-through is required. One of the surprising things we find in higher ed is that we will often debate a student's progression for a significant period of time and then make a recommendation. And the recommendation can even be carried out in that semester. But it's often the case that there isn't much follow through, and that by the time the next semester comes around, that case information is basically lost. So in many places this happens, or it might simply be that the people on the review panels are not the same people anymore, and so this helps us. Maintaining a case file helps us to keep track of the progression strategy we might put in place for a student. So that's managing the case file. And then if we go under session notes, this is a slightly different situation. So this is the case where we are possibly advising a student, and we may have asked the student to meet with a counselor. And so the counselor would then make some notes on the student's progression. So again, we can just select the student here, and then it will auto create these labels. So the subject refers to the student, right? So the subject of this interview or of this counseling session, the subject is the student, so that's the subject label. And then the notes that we are going to make here, we are specifying this is a note, the notes that we took during the session with the student. So when discussing the progression with that student, we'll be recording various notes on here. And to assist that process, we have a series of templates available to us. So if you look here under template category, we can choose academic issues or non-academic issues. So for instance, substance abuse and peer pressure and things like that here, or under academic issues, poor choice of degree or course performance and things like that. So as we select a template, it will add that note for us. So this is simply to help us speed up the process of making notes. So of course, with the student in front of us and trying to do good counseling there, we can't keep writing, especially on a digital device. So it's useful to explain to the student, first of all, that we will be making notes just by tapping occasionally on a device. And so we get the text created quickly here. And then, of course, later on when reviewing what was said, these notes could be customized further. So the templating system is available here, and you can manage what's in that template under the template manager. So if you look into the note here, so we can, let's load or read all the templates available. So this template is called counseling session. And so in counseling session, as we saw, there are academic counseling aspects. So in that, then the templates are poor choice, and so we have a label for a template and the message for the template. So this is one template, I guess. So that will show up on our selector. So under the template, we can see the selector here. So if you click on that, then it will create some text. So the label is the thing that we click on. So this is the text for the label. And then the message is the text that will be inserted into the note here. So we can create as many templates as we like here. And we can create as many categories as we like as well. So there's the category of academic, and there's a category of non-academic as well. I guess, yeah, here are non-academic issues. So you can create multiple categories and multiple templates in those categories. You can also create different sets of templates. So this is a set of templates for a counseling session. You may also have templates. So for instance, if a tutor wants to provide feedback on a student after a tutorial or something like that, you can have another set of templates for that. So for the different types of counseling that happens, for instance, registration counseling or financial counseling, you can have different templates for each of those. And so that can help us make our notes quickly and as unobtrusively as possible during the actual counseling session. But of course, nothing beats just explaining to the student, this is my templating system. This is how I'm going to quickly make notes on our session. So that helps us keep track of the notes that we've made on the student. And so again, if we click here on create, then that will add to our list of so there were some notes for the student already. So that will add to the list of counseling session notes that are recorded for that student. So based on these notes, based on the academic records available, we can then think about adding to the student's case file, for instance, just marking that the student has been for counseling. And then, of course, another important aspect of this is the disclosure management. So not all of this can be disclosed generally. In fact, the default should be that none of this will be disclosed. And then we choose what we want to disclose to others. So in the case file, we would mark as, for instance, data available for academic decision-making and things like that. So you have to manage the disclosure, but as it stands, this can be used to quickly make notes during counseling sessions and in maintaining the student case file. Okay, so that's available under the Casework Counselor. The bookings system that was pointed out in a previous session, and then the use of the academic records and the recommenders and so on, those have also been reviewed in other videos. So that's where the Casework Counselor is. Thanks very much for listening.